Yokoso o ashitare. Welcome back. We've got a really good story here. A suspenseful nail-biter. Well, I don't know how nail-biting it's gonna be because I'm not the best at presenting these kinds of things, but this one is a suspenseful story. It's a little bit in the horror genre. It deals with supernatural beings that are out to get innocent people. So, buckle up, and I'll tell you all about it. Once upon a time, imawa mukashi, the Emperor Montoku died, which isn't particularly anything of note. However, after he died, there was a nobleman by the name of Abe no Yasuhito, and he was a dainagon. He was a grand counselor. And specifically, this Abe no Yasuhito, I'm just going to call him Abe from here on out, was specifically tasked with the job of finding a place to lay the emperor's body to rest, to determine his mausoleum. To be honest though, I'm a little hazy on the language of this part, but I believe that's what this guy is supposed to do, is he is supposed to go out and find a suitable place for the emperor's grave. And that's what he does. He gets a retinue of some people, including some soldiers because they're going to be traveling, and he brings with him one onmyoji. Now, an onmyoji, if any of you guys are particularly knowledgeable about Japanese culture and Japanese history, you may know that word. Onmyoji is basically a Japanese sorcerer, a wizard, somebody practiced in arcane arts and who understands things not of this world. And this onmyoji was from Shigeoka and was known as Shigeoka no Kawabito. I am going to refer to him simply as Kawabito. Now this Kawabito, not only was he just an onmyoji, not only was he just a wizard or a practiced magician, but he was really good at his job. One of the best in the whole country. There was almost nobody who could stand against him, and when even comparing him to the ancient sages of old, he was just as good as any of them. Truly a one-in-a-million guy. But so one day, Abe and all his men, along with Kawabito, are out doing what they're doing, and they're finding a specific place to put the emperor's body to rest. And they found a place, and after they were done finding it, they were on their way home. And while they were riding along on their horses, because they're all noblemen, so they gotta ride on horses. But as they're coming back, Kawabito suddenly pulls his horse up right next to Abe's. And Abe is the boss here. And so Abe sees Kawabito coming up next to him and thinks, oh, I guess he's got something he wants to discuss with me. And he turns his attention to Kawabito and gives him his full undivided attention. And once Kawabito realized that his boss was now lending his ear, he took a deep breath and he came forward and he told Abe something very, very important. He said, "My lord, for many, many years, I have served in my capacity as onmyoji. I have pursued this path with all of my ability in an attempt to be of use to the people around me. And when I look back on my career, not once have I found any moments where I made any major mistakes. Until now. Unfortunately, I have made a grave error. And because of that, there's a god of this land that is now out to get both me and you. And unfortunately, there isn't a whole lot that either you nor I can do about it. It will be really hard to deal with. With all that being said, my lord, how will you respond?" And when Abe heard this, at first he was stunned beyond words. He didn't know what to say. That's literally what the text says. It says, "Subete mono oboezu narinu," which meant that he could absolutely think of nothing. And so after being dumbstruck for a second and just looking at this onmyoji, trying to process what he was just told, that there is a god out to get them, he finally collects his wits a bit, and he simply says, exasperated, "What am I supposed to think about this? I don't know anything about onmyoji or gods. Do something. Save me and yourself, please." And with that, Kawabito, despite looking very concerned and obviously very agitated, simply said, "I understand, sir. However, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure I can do what is needed. I will do my best to come up with a way to hide both you and myself from this raging god." And then he turned to the retinue, and he told the entire retinue, "Men, please, all of you, go on ahead. Leave both me and the Lord here. We have some business we have to take care of." And I'm sure the retinue found this a little bit strange. Like, why are both of them, just them, hanging out behind? But Kawabito did not see fit to tell the retinue what exactly was going on. He just wanted to send everybody ahead first, said, "Don't worry, I will protect the Lord. We will catch up with you when we catch up with you." And so, with the rest of the retinue gone, and both Abe and Kawabito being alone out in the middle of nowhere, it started getting dark. And at this point, Kawabito and Abe got off of their horses, and they sent their horses home, because apparently I guess you can just do that. And just the two of them went out into the middle of this rice field. And at this point, Kawabito had Abe sit or lay down, basically crouch down in a comfortable position. And then Kawabito went around and he started cutting down stalks of rice. And he took this rice, bundled it together, and he covered Kawabito with just this pile of rice stalks. And then, while it was still getting dark, Kawabito wandered around the area very, very quietly, casting spells under his breath, muttering enchantments in specific areas. And after he was done casting his spells, he came to the pile of rice stalks and crawled inside himself. And when Abe looked over to see Kawabito to check up and ask him, is everything okay? How are things going? Kawabito assured him, well, I've done everything that I can. But the whole time, Kawabito looked pale, terrified, and he was shaking from sheer fear. And obviously, this did not inspire confidence in Abe. But what else are you going to do? And so after talking to each other just a little bit, underneath this pile of rice stalks, they went silent for a while and just sat there. And after a short time, they started hearing sounds. Specifically, what they heard was the sound of an innumerable host of footsteps. Just tons and tons of people, which is really odd, because this is the middle of nowhere. There shouldn't be innumerable numbers of people. There shouldn't be massive crowds out here. But that's what they were hearing. And they heard this crowd of something come close to them and then pass by. And so they sat there and waited, listening desperately to try to hear what was going on. But they couldn't hear any sounds. And just as they were about to get ready to leave, suddenly they heard the sounds coming back. The footsteps were returning. And the footsteps got closer and closer and stopped close enough to where they could now hear these people speaking. Except they weren't people. In some sense, they sounded like human voices, but in another sense, they were not. And unfortunately, the text doesn't describe it any further other than it was both human sounding and not human sounding. But they did hear a voice. Look here. It's right about here that the tracks for the horses suddenly get lighter. They must have abandoned their horses and got off and are hiding somewhere nearby. But that will avail them nothing. They can't hide from us. Look around. Dig up the very earth if you have to. They're going to be around here somewhere. And remember that Kawabito is a very skilled magician. He's probably cast some sort of a spell to keep us from finding him. Be wary of that when you are looking, and search the place. We won't let that scum get away. And followed by this, they heard the sounds of movement, voices that were human and not human, all around them. But after some time passed, several of the voices came together and told the voice that seemed to be the ringleader of the whole thing, they're not here. No matter where we look for, we simply cannot find them. And whatever this thing was, maybe gave a grunt of frustration, snorted in disgust and annoyance, but simply said, well, they may have gotten away today, but they can't hide forever. We will find them. There is no way they can escape what's coming to them. Let's meet again on the last day of the 12th month, and at midnight, we will send out another searching party for them, and this time, they won't get away. We will search all over the land, and we will search even below the earth and above the heavens, and we will find them on that day. So, let us leave for now, but on the last day of the 12th month at midnight, we will reconvene, and we will catch them. They can't escape us forever. And with that, the voices all together left. After some time had passed and two men felt that the coast was clear, they instantly sprang out of their hiding place beneath all of these stalks of rice, and they started running. They ran as fast as they could to get out of that place. They did not want to be there. And after they had gone a distance and felt like they were, well, maybe a little bit safer, probably not completely safe, and after catching their breath, Abe simply looks to Kawabito and says, if they do what they said they're gonna do, we can't escape them. This is a god we're talking about. We barely managed to escape their notice now. How are we going to do that if they do exactly what they just said that they were going to do? And Kawabito simply took a deep breath and reassured his lord. Well, my good sir, now that we know when they are going to become searching for us, the only thing that we can do is to hide both of ourselves yet again, but we need to do it without anybody else knowing about it. So, when that time approaches, I will come to find you, and I will do everything that I can do to make sure that you and I get through this safely. And with that, where normally two noblemen of their stature would actually ride back home, they didn't have their horses and they had to walk, each to his own house. And so, time passes, as it always does, and the fated day eventually came, the last day of the 12th month, literally the last day of the year. And so, being the day before New Year's, the whole city was in an uproar, and in a good uproar. Everybody was celebrating. There were festivals to be had. There were wishes to make. There were all sorts of things that were going on. But early in the day, Kawabito came to Abe and told him in secrecy, where nobody else could hear under his breath, "When you can, meet me at the crossroads of Nijo and Nishino Omiya, and make sure that when you leave, nobody knows about it. Do not let anybody get an inkling of what's happening. Meet me there as the sun's going down. I'll see you." And he very casually simply walked off. And so the day passed, and the sun started to go down. And among the hustle and bustle of everything that was going on, Abe managed to slip into the crowd, maybe disguised himself, and slipped back out and headed for that crossroads. And sure enough, when he got there, Kawabito was there waiting for him. And together, these two men went to the Temple of Sagaji. And when they got there, they entered into the main hall, and they climbed up into the latticed ceiling. You can see a picture here, but in a lot of ancient Japanese buildings, there was the place where people spent all of their time, and then above that, you had kind of like a first ceiling, and it was not a full ceiling, it was covered with a lattice work. And then there was a little space above there, almost like an attic, and then you got to the actual ceiling of the building. But the two men scrambled up into this latticed ceiling, and Kawabito had Abe sit in a full lotus position, which, if you know anything about Buddhism, is a very holy way to sit, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's specifically the way in which the Buddha himself sat when he achieved enlightenment, or so it's said. But after making sure that his lord, Abe, was taken care of, Kawabito began casting spells again, muttering under his breath, moving back and forth to make sure that all spells were cast in the proper areas. And then when he was done, he went by his lord and he too sat down. And also, even though he wasn't a magician and he wasn't particularly knowledgeable in the arcane arts, Abe too simply sat there and chanted Buddhist sutras, called on the name of Amida, basically said prayers, because that's all he could do at this point. And so the two men sat there in silence in the dark temple, simply waiting. And right about midnight, suddenly a wind blew into the temple from outside. A surprisingly warm wind for it being the dead of winter, with a strange, unearthly smell. And as soon as that wind came blowing through, freaking both of these men out, the earth shook. A small earthquake suddenly followed along this unnatural wind. And clearly, it was the gods trying to find these two men. And Abe specifically was terrified. And they both waited with bated breath, knowing that their time may come. But it soon passed, and everything went silent. And both men sat there, waiting, and waiting, and waiting, until they heard a rooster crow. Now, it wasn't quite yet light, and if any of you have ever had chickens, you know that roosters don't cry at daybreak, they cry before daybreak. It's really obnoxious. But a rooster crowed, and they knew that daylight was coming. It was only a little bit away. And so both of the men climbed down from this latticed ceiling, they walked out of the temple, and they began making their way home. And right as they got to that point where they were going to separate, Kawabito turned to his lord and said, "My lord, you have no more need to fear. Because you had me with you and I was able to concoct a spell of hiding, we have successfully evaded the wrath of this god. I'm glad I could be of service." But he wasn't the only buddy who was glad and thankful. Abe praised his magician, his main onmyoji, and was so grateful to him. Specifically, the term it uses is haisu. Hai means something akin to worship. He was so grateful that he had been spared and he was going to get to live to see another day, despite being the target of the wrath of a god. So grateful doesn't even come close to expressing the feelings that Abe had to his onmyoji, his wizard. Sounds a little strange when you say it like that. You know, here we've got this imposing story about the wrath of supernatural beings, and he's just a wizard. He's a wizard. And thus is it said that truly this Kawabito was one of the noblest onmyoji to ever walk the realm. And that's the story. I do have one point of commentary. So specifically, these two men were being chased by a kami. Now, one of the translations for kami is god, because the main pantheon of the ancient Japanese are gods. You've got the sun goddess, Amaterasu. You've got the god of the moon, Tsukuyomi. You've got my favorite god, Takemi Kazuchi, who is a god of swords and lightning. They're very powerful, very imposing beings. And you've got many gods all over Japan. Some are very, very powerful, but some of them not so much. You can have gods that are simply trees. You can have very small gods, gods of seemingly silly things. I believe there's a god of fermented soybeans. Some of them are powerful, some of them not so much. Some of them have physical forms, some of them don't. It's all kind of just a catch-all phrase for spiritual, supernatural beings. So these two men were specifically being chased by a god of whatever land they had been in. And usually if it's a god of a whole region, a whole area, it's probably a pretty powerful one. But regardless, it was some kind of supernatural being that was out to get them. And because of the efforts of this onmyoji, Kawabito, they were able to narrowly escape capture. And that's it. That is all I have to say. I want to thank you very much for your listen/your watch. If you liked this story, please like the video. If you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more where that came from. I will be doing this for a while, according to my schedule. There are lots and lots of stories to get through. But with all that being said, I thank you one last time. Ito katejike no koso haberikere. And hopefully we will see you in the next one. Sayonara.